Good evening, John Augustine back again. I hope I find you well. Uh, we're going to be talking about healthcare, but just before I do that, a little bit, there's a little item here, and uh, and it says, "Did you know snowdrops contain a natural antifreeze, and on frosty nights, snowdrops collapse with freezing stress. Their antifreeze allows them to recover as soon as the temperature rises. During the First World War, snowdrop bulbs were used to de-ice tanks. Not bad for a humble flower. Just a thought. The weather over the past week or so has been so cold with both wind and hard frosts. Also a spiritual meaning too. We often talk about God's love and the difference it makes spiritually. The invitation each day is to let the love of God melt away our fears, doubts, negativity, and any worries we may be experiencing right now. Just gently allow God's love to melt you. May you experience the peace and joy that comes from turning and opening to God's love. Even the coldest parts of our lives can melt away when we turn to God's love, healing, forgiveness, and beautiful blessings. Even if you are not religious, let something or someone melt the parts of your life that feel cold or frosty. The power of love is really strong, and it certainly has the power to melt and transform in ways that go beyond words. That is why spiritually the love of God has got lots of significance, and the invitation is to simply allow God's love to melt you, like the little flower. I've some of them in the garden, and it's a lovely little flower, little white flower. And I see the daffodils beginning to come up, and it's amazing what. And they come up this time in spring, and they're sort of yellow, and you've daffodils and as well, and they're a lovely gift to show what God has provided. We have to see it. I see it with His eyes. I try to see it that way. Another gift of nature to lighten the load and give us that joy. So I'm talking about healthcare. Now, my brother, Lord of mercy, little brother Brian, he had heart trouble. When we were young, we lived in Holt, and Brian was in Temple Street Hospital for some years. But he was very well looked after by the staff there. I think it was under the control at the time of nuns. And it was really a lovely hospital. We went in to see him, and he was so well looked after by the staff, the nurses. They were a, they were a lovely sort of, oh, even as a young person you can see when you can see that goodness. Isn't it funny? You see it straight away, and it's had it there. And then later on, when my father had been a guard, was moved to Boyle, Brian was with us, and so when and he was very bright, but he had this heart trouble. He died at 13, but he was in the same room that myself and my brother were in, a bigger bed. He had his own bed. And so we grew up, and my father used to bring him on a bicycle, um, and he had a special carrier for him. So he got around, and he went to school, and believe it or not, years afterwards, when I used to visit Boyle, when I was working, when I retired, and then I was doing what I had been doing before in the pet food line, and I used to stay in Boyle every month and meet my friend Christy Wynn, and we'd have a drink in his brother's pub just at the corner, and have a chat. And there was one of the people there that used to have a wholesaler, Candons, and boy, they were big wholesalers in their time. One of the only ones in the country that got distributed the sugar when there was, trouble and sugar had to be distributed, and they were chosen. And they were, well, James Cannon was a very successful businessman, and this was his son that knew my brother. And that's the first time I heard it. And that was a good nice few years afterwards. So he knew. And so obviously he made an impression. Isn't that good? Anyways, that was the healthcare that counted. And that's what we mean. You may have had relatives and maybe yourself and brothers and sisters in hospital from time to time. And your experience of that could be good, and then sometimes it mightn't be so good. It depends, doesn't it? But I noticed recently about healthcare, it seems to have what I call morphed into a different meaning. And they're using healthcare, which most of us would figure out that it's for to make you better, and they should be treated in such a kindly way that you will recover. Because when you're not well, um, aside from the medical side, it's the kindness of the nurses and the way that they sort of are able to monitor. Sometimes they are more observant than the doctors because they see. And I know nurses have saved many a person. Our Irish nurses, they were absolutely marvellous. I didn't have to have this university education that Mr. Mihal Martin and his stupidity as Minister for Health, when nurses just had to have it, were enough to have the primary cert, and you wouldn't mind if it was just the intercert because they're the ones that have the real vocation. And what do you do? University education. So these ones now that are nurses are might think they're nearly doctors or something. They haven't got the same openness and gentleness that the other ones had that didn't have all these qualifications. You could over be qualified, and you just wonder what was the agenda behind that, because now we have a lot of nurses from other countries and their command of English is limited. And they don't seem, they're not to have the same culture that our Irish nurses used to have. So this is what this crowd have done. So what do they mean by healthcare now? Well, unfortunately, not what I'm after talking about. They're using that for abortion, calling it healthcare. In the United States, that's what they're at. So isn't that confusing? Because you were so, in other words, they're using words like healthcare for something quite evil, the killing of the innocent and the vulnerable. That means the people that are euthanasia and assisted suicide, they're vulnerable people. They should be helped, not their lives finished. And then it's extended in some countries that anybody wants, whether they have medical problems, they just feel despondent and they want to end their life. And that can happen too. They're allowing that and calling it healthcare. It's quite the reverse. So they're using words that are absolutely good words that have a good meaning for an evil purpose. So you have to sort of know clearly what they mean by healthcare because they're using it for abortion and other things. The gender business of changing young people's think they're a boy thinks he's a girl and vice versa. I mean, they must go through that, but they're hearing it on the media. And when you hear too much of that, then you begin to be confused, young people. I mean, when I was young, when you were taught, you weren't confused like that. It was a different era. Yes, you had problems in other areas because you had to lift your hands and get a few bits. And sometimes in the back of your ear and all the rest of it. But be that as it may, there was things were fairly straightforward. There was none of this ambiguity. They often talk about human rights now, and that's a very good thing. But they're referring to something entirely different than the human rights that we understand. Human rights for people that have different approaches to life. People that are men want to be going with men, which is very unusual, and women that are women instead of go with a man, they want to go with women, and have relations and all the rest of it. So that doesn't seem kind of like human rights. Another sort of human rights, if they want to change their sex, or if they want to, have medical treatment, and some of them not too happy that have it. A lot of them have various regrets because they're neither one thing or another, and you just wonder: is it a form of population control? Because the more confused, and young children now are being taught as regards whatever, they have a different name for it, but they're being taught like instructions and that end of it that are disturbing their innocence, assuming that they're innocent and that they can learn from their family or learn from as they grow up. Because not everybody comes from a family that's um, trying to bring their children on, say, in the Catholic faith or whatever it is, give them some values. Or if they're being undermined in the school, and parents then, when they come over, they're calling the ones that are standing up for good, calling them, bringing in hate speech. This crowd here that we have here in charge in Dublin, that have already inflicted various problems on the people, and calling it something other than what it is. Healthcare, the gender business, and all the rest of it. So they're using words that had a good meaning, and now using those words, and that's not healthcare, is it? For to do that kind of thing. So they have confusing people. Confusion, even confused now when I'm long in the tooth. But younger people would be confused, wouldn't they? And now we have somebody that two women that attacked, I think, a Catholic church or something somewhere, but they were stopped. And there were 21 and 22 climate change individuals. So this is what they think climate. I mean, if it rains, it rains. But this crowd that are yapping about the climate, and especially this man in the Vatican, I mean, the climate is God given, and they have no control over it. I don't know what they're talking about. They should do something about the plastic that the supermarkets produce too much of it. What they should be producing is something that can be degraded, or whatever you call it. That it doesn't. The plastic is a plastic mountain, and that's the one that's causing problem in the seas and that in the rivers. Well, not so much in the rivers, but I mean, all this plastic, it doesn't degrade. Whereas when we were young, it was all ordinary bags, paper, and they were degradable. There was no such thing as all this yap. Thanks be to God, I went through a good part of my life without that. I wouldn't like to be young now and having to put up with that nonsense. But we have a Green Party there, and sure, they're clueless. And we won't go into that, but we're just talking about the business of the healthcare. So be very careful. Apparently, they're going to have a referendum, but to be phrasing it somewhere different, and it'll confuse people. So I hope that there's enough information from other ones that recognise what they're up to. They want to change the idea of a family, which is a father and a mother and children, and one making it something else that'll be parent one and parent two. They have an agenda, but they'll be phrasing it in words that would be confusing, like what I'm after describing about the healthcare. So be aware of that, and this is the kind of talk that I'll be doing about various issues, and there's always a lot to talk about, believe it or not. And so I hope a bit of a help there doing this type of thing. And as I was talking about my brother, Lord of Mercy, died at 13, gone to heaven, of course. And my other brother had eventually psychological problems, Lord of Mercy and Donald. He had a goiter and he had an operation for it and wasn't successful because he had a couple of squeaks in his young life that I didn't have so much. Although I had me squeaks as well, but they didn't leave any damage, you know. But he had squeaks that did some harm. God help him. So he died at 50. Now, he died of natural causes because of his, he was in a home, and a home that where they're looked after, and that he wouldn't have been able to look after himself. God help him. But I'd say my little brother is in heaven, and I'd say my brother Donald is also in heaven. So, like, as you go through life, you come across these issues, and you pray for them, of course, and my father and mother and all that. Uh, there's my father and mother when they were married, and they were lovely, weren't they? He's standing up, he was a guard, and she's sitting down. He was from Limerick. He was from Howth. Nice, isn't it? So there you are. So life is very funny. People never know when to start off what they're going to have to go through. And we all have crosses as we go through life in different kinds. I would have encountered them myself. But I've had a good innings, and thanks be to God as I began working for myself. When you're working for others, you don't have the same. Even though I was good at what I was doing in the business, the sales line. But when I worked for myself, then after I retired from the insurance, I went back to what I was at before, the pet food, and I made a great fist of it. And I was able to do it. I had a limited company, made it limited. So I was an employee of my own limited company. I didn't call it by my name, I had some other name. And I was an employee, so therefore I paid income tax. And I had a salary and I had my expenses where I got okayed with revenue, the income tax crowd for the directors who was up in Mount Street. And funny enough, the lady I was dealing with was from not too far from Boylan area that I knew, and nice quiet area, and we got on pretty well because I worked in Boyle. This was a place between Boyle and Gucci, a place called Gucci, a small town, and I had customers there. Funny enough, as I started working for myself in the pet food, I got them all around the country. And anyway, suffice to say that she was from there, and we got on very well. So I was well treated. Nothing special, but at least I got what sort of expense to get tax free. And so because I'd be down the country and I'd be staying maybe in a hotel or a good bed and breakfast because hotels were oftentimes too expensive. Some of them were all right, but some of them were more expensive than was right. And because this was before the collapse, if you like. I returned in 2004, so the things were expensive in these places, even in some rural parts that you wouldn't think. And it was thanks be to God, it turned out well. But I'm mentioning about as I was talking about the subject of um, healthcare. So beware of that and pass on the news. So please God, I'll be doing more. There's plenty of us. There's always plenty to talk about, and we need to share. If you have any ideas, let me know that you'd like to hear something about. Bye now. Enjoy the rest of your evening.